My Credo, a message for May 3rd. Avis, Harry, Lucian, Madeline, Mara, and Olivia, Sano, Simon, and Sydney. I have to tell you that I got a kick out of Dana sharing with me that the reading that followed you through your coming-of-age experience this year was The Great End in Religious Instruction by William Ellery Channing, number 652 in our hymnal. I'm a big Channing nerd. In fact, I began my message last week by talking about Channing's life. I think Channing is right here. The goal of spiritual growth is not to arrive at the right answers, but to have a mind that is stirred up, to have a conscience so refined that it loves the neighbor as much as the self, and to have an awakened soul that cherishes spiritual life. I agree that those are great ends. In my words this morning, I'm going to say a few words about my religious upbringing, a few words about spiritual development, and I'm going to end by sharing my own credo for now. I grew up Unitarian, Universalist, but my beliefs have changed a lot over time. In my UU Sunday school growing up, we learned about the stories and traditions of different world religions. We learned Jewish and Christian stories from the Bible. We learned stories from Native American mythology. And we learned stories from Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, and more. There was a lot we didn't learn in Sunday school, but one thing we did learn was that our world was blessed and enriched by religious diversity, not threatened by it. It was a beautiful thing that our world includes diverse religions. In high school, believe it or not, my friends and I decided we were pagans, earth-centered goddess worshippers. Not really sure how we became interested in this, and we were certainly self-taught. We probably made it up as we went along. But I think that there was something appealing about this idea of a world alive with mysterious power that we could learn to interact with. In college, my beliefs changed, and I decided that I was an atheist, decided that God did not exist. And it's interesting because my atheism that I had in college actually coincided with my decision to become a minister and the awakening of my interest in justice. And then in divinity school, my beliefs changed again. In divinity school, I met a lot of smart Christians who were devoted to building a beautiful and just and liberated world, and a beautiful and just and liberated church, just like I was. I admired and respected them, and I began to dive deeper into studying the Bible and Christianity. I liked walking with those who were trying to walk with Jesus. And as I've been a minister, my beliefs have continued to change. I've found inspiration and sustenance in a variety of sources, in poetry and literature, in activism, in the Hebrew prophets, in mysticism, in ministry, in music, in nature, and yes, in going back and reading William Ellery Channing every so often. Two observations I could make. First, I could go from pagan to atheist to Christian to what Tom Owen Toll calls a free-thinking mystic with hands. I could go from one to the next without ever feeling unwelcome in a Unitarian Universalist church. The church was big enough and open enough that I felt included and fully welcomed at every moment of belief and disbelief along my journey. Second, the second thing I might observe is that belief is not really about finding out the right answer. If the goal is to find a correct, permanent answer, then faith development hasn't really worked for me. However, if the goal is to find, as Channing says, to find ways of thinking and living and loving that stir up the mind and prick the conscience and move the heart, then I would like to believe that I'm living a rich spiritual life. And community is such a big part of that. We don't arrive at our beliefs by going and sitting alone at the top of a mountain, though quiet time to ourselves can be important. We arrive at our beliefs, I think, through living life in the messiness of human meeting. Theodore Parker says, "My own inward consciousness widened and grew richer as I came into practical contact with living people, turned time into life." We grow spiritually by sitting in meditation and by serving meals at the soup kitchen, by reading poetry and by swinging a hammer with Habitat, by writing and by coming to church and listening to other people who may have very different beliefs than we do, than you do. There's an old joke that goes, "I was thrown out of college for cheating on the metaphysics exam. I looked into the soul of the boy sitting next to me." But actually, that's one of the best ways to keep growing, to really listen and understand another person and another person's beliefs is a great way to shape your own deepest understandings. For a time, I was really into the work of a developmental psychologist named James Fowler. He proposed, just as Piaget talked about stages of development in children, that we all go through phases of religious development, and in fact, that we can develop religiously throughout our entire lives. I don't really spend a lot of time trying to teach Fowler anymore. I would introduce Fowler's 6 stages of faith development. You can go look them up. And everyone would say, "Oh, I'm at the highest stage." And then I would say, well, Fowler actually believed that the last stage was basically impossible to attain. And then people would say, "Oh, I'm at the second highest stage." And I would say, well, Fowler actually says that we only get to that stage like really late in life. And then people weren't interested after that. And truth be told, I would look at it and get frustrated trying to put myself on those stages. It's worth noting that scholars and psychologists have told us that we pass through stages of faith through all of our lives, that our lives are one in which our faith is actually continuing to grow. It isn't a static thing. I find that really beautiful and hopeful. And these scholars and psychologists do say that around the age of 13 or 14, adolescents reach a stage where they begin to sort authorities. There are now many authorities in their life. Previously, the authorities had consisted of parents and perhaps a few teachers. But now, around age 13 or 14, the sources of authority just expand and include parents and educators, yes, and religious leaders, but also friends and experts and other sources of authority. And young people around this age, adolescents, begin to ask, which of these sources of authority should I listen to? That is the big question. Which of these sources of authority should I listen to? And I think in coming of age, we do this really neat thing by saying, here is a safe place to sort it out. And we even hint that trusting your own heart and trusting your own conscience can be one of those valid sources of authority. In honor of our coming of age class this year, I decided to put a challenge to myself. I decided to challenge myself to write my own credo as it is now. I am thankful that we give this challenge to our youth, and I can't wait until we're all back together again and we get to have our coming of age class stand up in the pulpit. That powerful experience of standing in the pulpit and speaking their credo to the congregation. I also want to put this challenge to all of us. If it's been a while since you've written your credo, or if you've never written a credo, I challenge you to do that. Take some time to sit down and write it out and see what happens. You can even write it out, put it away, and come back to it months or years later and see whether it still rings true for you or if things have changed. So without further ado, here is my credo for now. There's a quote I like that goes something like this: "There is only one God, and it is not you. There is only one God, and it is not you." My credo really begins with the second part of that statement, "It is not you," by which I mean it is not me. By which I mean existing with an awareness that I am not all-powerful, not all-knowing, and not perfect, nor am I perfectly loving or perfectly forgiving or perfectly compassionate. I'm just perfectly imperfect, perfectly fallible. And out of this awareness comes liberation and another sense. A sense that since I'm not perfectly self-derived or perfectly self-existing, that I actually need other people. I need others, just as I need air to breathe, and water to drink, and plants to fuel me. And because I need others, out of this sense of dependence comes gratitude, and out of gratitude comes a sense of responsibility, and out of responsibility comes generosity. This is really what I think is meant when we talk about the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part, that seventh principle, that interdependent web. It really means this sense that we are, in radical ways, dependent on one another. We are connected to all, related to all, radically in need of each other. There is a mysterious, invisible force connecting us all, like spiritual gravity. And God often appears to me as that force, reminding me lovingly and joyfully that, Tom, you are not perfect. And I find great hope and solace in that. I believe that it's important. It's important to take injustice and oppression and racism and sexism and homophobia and environmental degradation seriously. That these forces not only harm individuals, but they warp and tear and distort the very fabric of our being, connecting each to all. That these forces actually do damage to all of us by harming our interdependence and our interconnection. I believe that I cannot be free until you are free, for our liberation is tied up in one another. And I believe in church, that imperfect institution made up of imperfect people. I believe in the power of multi-generational community. I believe in the power of open doors and welcoming as a spiritual practice. Believe in the power of covenant. And I believe in the power of being intentional about how we are together. That magic happens when we listen and share together. I believe that well-behaved churches rarely make history, and therefore it is incumbent upon us to stretch ourselves and to grow and to step out of our comfort zones. And I believe that due to my own imperfections, that my credo will continue to change and develop and grow. I hope that it will. All my life, I hope that it will. For we are always growing, always developing, always changing, and always connected. Amen. Blessed be. I love you and I'm with you. And thank you to our Coming of Age youth for all their work this year. Can't wait till we're back together again, where we'll get to enjoy the credos together.